welcome back. So to shed some light on what you just saw in that report, we've got Mr. Bismarck Rewane, who is the chairman of that Presidential Technical Advisory Committee on implementation of the national minimum wage. He's also the CEO of Financial Derivatives. Good morning, and thank you for coming on today.
Good morning for having me.
Well, when they say it will take effect immediately,
yeah,
that's good news for Lagos. So that means the next pay, it will reflect.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, okay. But how significant is this? Because if you take a look at the inflation rates, you look at our economic growth rates, I mean, yes, it's good, the increased minimum wage. How significant is it?
Okay, first and foremost, let's try and differentiate between wages and salaries.
Okay.
First thing they teach you in economics is the difference between wages and salaries. Salaries are paid into accounts, wages are paid in cash in those days, but now everything is automated. An increase in wages without an increase in productivity is it's dangerous for the economy. Let me put it this way: it reduces unemployment and also reduces output. So we don't want to go down that direction. So firstly, what is this about? The increase in minimum wage was a 67% increase from 18,000 to 30,000. It takes the lowest paid worker in the government service up to 30,000. It takes the lowest paid state government worker and local government worker also to 30,000. Then there's what we call the consequential cost of this impact. And in the end, there were two things. One was the tripartite committee that determined what was the optimal wage. And then there was a technical committee, which is our committee, which looked at the way of funding it, optimizing revenue, and what adjustments have to be made to ensure that there was what we call macroeconomic stability and balance. So what we tried to do was to look at the impact of this increase in wage to see how we can put in place certain adjustments which were necessary, certain adjustments which were imperative, and certain adjustments which were optional.
Is this figure, this 30,000 naira,
yes,
this 67% increase, is it across board?
67% increase is if you were earning 18,000 and you went to 30,000, okay. That's 67%.
Yeah, but I mean, is it across board? Is it for all staff of all the...
No, you see what happens is that there are those who are in grade 1 to 4, right? And those guys were those earning below 30,000.
Yeah.
They moved up to 30,000.
Okay.
But if you were earning 31,000 and somebody was earning 18,000, then that guy gets to 30 and you have only 1,000. Where you had a 12,000 naira difference, you now have a 1,000 naira difference.
Okay.
So there's what we call the consequential adjustments, which was done for all of those earning above 30,000 before.
Okay.
Right? So what we did in 2011, don't forget that this adjustment in salaries was 2 years past due. It was probably done every 5 years.
Yeah.
But we did it last in 2011. So in 2011, we went from whatever it was to 18,000. And then all other employees of the federal government who were earning above 18,000 got 900 naira. And the youth corpers who earned 10% above the minimum wage went to 19,800. That was in 2011.
Was there any way, I mean, there was a lot of hue and cry from the state governments about whether or not they would be able to pay. How was that resolved?
Well, okay, now let's
I was going to say, before that, you know, a lot of Nigerian, even labor, they believe that, look, this is just simple. Just increase the minimum wage and that's it. So from your findings, was it that easy, or do we have to have this committee all the time to determine how you go about increasing the minimum wage?
Government, you see, in some parts of the world, they have what they call indexation. You tie the minimum wage or the wages to a benchmark, inflation benchmark.
Yeah.
And every time inflation increases, you do that. But that, as shown in Brazil and Argentina, has become totally counterproductive. So what we tried to do was to look at the variables. One, the cumulative rate of inflation. We looked at the exchange rate adjustment. And we looked at essentially the erosion to purchasing power. So you try to restore as much as possible the workers' purchasing power, whilst at the same time you restore the ability of the employers, which is the federal government, the state governments, and the private sector, to be able to pay this without creating higher unemployment.
So in other words, after your calibrations and the recommendations you came out with, this 30,000 naira minimum is sustainable?
Yes, it is. But there are certain adjustments that have to be made.
Still?
Yes, there are certain adjustments. If you think that you can just increase salaries and without productivity and achieve macroeconomic stability, then that's a pipe dream.
So
it's not going to happen.
Who needs to make these adjustments?
No, the adjustments are fiscal. Fiscal activity, anything to do with expenditure, revenues, taxes, subsidies, and all of these things put together. But what you want to do is to ensure that by increasing the salaries, which is basically writing a higher check to employees, you do not create macroeconomic instability. And to do that, every responsible government has to sit back and see what they have to do to ensure that the economy is stable. In the past, you had situations where the moment you adjusted salaries, prices went out of whack, and there was riots and all of that because any increase in money supply without an increase in output will lead to hyperinflation. So we had to deal with that. You see, it's a responsible government in the sense that in spite of the fact that this was in the midst of an election, they depoliticized it by setting up a technical committee of experts who looked at it. And these were the best minds you can find anywhere, both in government and in the private sector. So it was a committee, it wasn't a one-man job. And in very thorough detail, we looked at, one, what was the gap created by this increase? Two, what were the organizational issues that would be thrown up? Because once you do that, then you have to make consequential adjustments across the board, expansion, gratuity, insurance, and everything. Then we looked at current sources of revenue. We looked at how to optimize those revenues, then new sources of revenue, and then structural adjustments that had to take place to ensure that this was sustainable, and then went finally to simulate scenarios just in case oil prices were reduced and production was to reduce by any disruption. Then how do we support this and make it sustainable? So it was an all-inclusive, extremely detailed study, and I think that the reason why today you are not having arrears, today you're not having market women pushing up prices, I'm not saying they're not going to do that, is because people have come to the conclusion that this was not a political gimmick, one. Two, it was done with these most sincere intentions to ensure that you are not worse off after this adjustment than you were before the adjustment.
Let me ask you this. The other time you talked about purchasing power, you remember that as at December 2014, the exchange rate was 183 naira to the dollar.
No, 155 was the 2014 official exchange rate.
Okay, and then the 18 naira minimum wage, was barely $100.
Yeah.
Now, at about 400 naira to the dollar.
360
to the dollar.
How have we got to
30. Well, he's the economist. I'm just a presenter. 30,000 naira is barely $83.
Yeah.
In the light of this, has the purchasing power really increased?
You're taking a minimum wage, right? And you're taking cumulative inflation. What has happened is that in the past 5 years, labor productivity in Nigeria has been negative. In other words, employers have been paying people who have become less productive, not necessarily because of on their own. If there's no power, then there's downtime. If there are other things, if you cannot get goods to the market. So there are a number of factors. If you just do an arithmetical adjustment, so okay, here it is, inflation is 100%, therefore you increase it 100%, and no increase in output, you are just going to push inflation further. And inflation is an erosion of purchasing power. So what you have done is to say $83 is better than, is worse than $100. But you were, the day before this adjustment, you were on maybe $20, right? So this adjustment is to give you a kind of boost, and then from there, you can leverage up. And there are private sector adjustments, there are public, local government, state governments, and federal government. In the end, it's just the beginning of a process of increasing salaries, increasing wages, increasing output, and then more than anything else, all of these things without growth in the GDP is a waste of time.
So the poverty figures are just climbing every now and then. If we look at the poverty clock, which we did last week, showed there are about 92 million people is in this country. Is there a correlation, a relationship, now that we have this increase in wages? Will we begin to see a decrease in the poverty index?
Not necessarily. Poverty is a function of productivity. And even if I increase your salaries, if there's no increase in productivity, the value of that currency or the value of your salary will reduce to the point. So what we should be looking at is how to ensure that the Nigerian worker can be more productive. And how are you going to achieve this? You need new investments, and you need existing investments. Investments in power, investments in energy, petroleum, investment in manufacturing, investment in agriculture, and investments. Investments come about because people know that they will get a return on their investment. The return on their investment is a function of pricing. If I cannot price my electricity at the cost-reflective tariff levels, then I'm not going to invest. If you do not invest in electricity, there's a correlation between electricity output and productivity. So we need to address some of those issues. Built into our report were a number of adjustments that needs to be made. Some of them voluntary, most of them involuntary, some imperative, some necessary, and then a few optional.
So it's now poor of the poor that we're facing.
Poor versus the very poor.
Poor versus the very poor. That's what we're facing in the country.
No,
there are no rich people in this country.
No, there are rich people, but their quantum are they are so few. So let's say maybe 4 or 5% of Nigerians own, right? But there's a physical constraint to, no matter how rich you are, you're unlikely to eat 5 times a day. After 3 times, you'll be saturated. You cannot go into 2 cars at the same time. You're unlikely to be able to sleep on 2 beds at the same time. So there's a physical constraint to how much you can consume. Consumption is what drives the economy. So it's important that revenues, right, and income percolate down the pyramid so that people can spend more. And if they spend more, then output will increase. But when you have inequitable distribution of income and opportunity, the rich that can only physically spend so much, and that's a constraint. So we need to see some kind of democratic change in the consumption and income pattern so that the people at the bottom of the pyramid are empowered to spend more, and that will create jobs.
I'll still follow up on that and perhaps link it to Ayo's question earlier, but I'm just wondering, if 70% of your recommendations are implemented and not maybe say 90%, will we have the desired results still?
Well, it's not a binary thing. It's not either or. It's a question that if you, let me put it this way, if you do not implement the necessary and imperative conditions, like adjustments, then you're going nowhere. You cannot say that, okay, you choose that you have malaria and you're going to take only 2 tablets instead of 4. It's not going to get you anywhere. Maybe you have a temporary relief and then you go back and what we call the relapsing fever is going to be worse than the original fever. So there are certain things that are inevitable. And the president has said it, that, we need to make those adjustments. Some of them voluntary, like I said, some of them imperative. You must do that.
Are the timelines you fixed to it?
Well,
duration, say, fixed power. You need to fix power in the next 2 years or 3 years for the minimum wage to have effect.
No, fixing power is not the adjustment. The adjustment is how to adjust the pricing of this service so that it encourages investment. The moment people know that the pricing is now business friendly and it makes sense, investments will come in. And within a matter of months, you begin to see the impact. It's not, you see the impact and the trend will be there, and investments will go into power. Investments will go into refining of petroleum products. Investments will go into pipelines. Investments will go into concessioning of airports. There are so many things that a mixed economy brings, but without investment and the investment multiplier, you are not going to get the optimal return on your capital formation. That is the truth. So you're not going to die, but you'll be muddling through. And so if we continue to go at 2% when population is going at 2.6 or 3%, every day people are getting poorer. So it is, what are those things that will make growth faster so that you can achieve, at 4% you have population covered, at 6% you have full employment, at above 8% you have transformational growth, which makes everybody happy, and your people stop jumping across the Mediterranean, emigrating and all of that. People will be more proud about the economy and they live better. So, prosperity and happiness come together, and poverty and misery go together, and then you have social insecurity and kidnapping, all sorts of things. So you need to start from the beginning. What is it that will make you achieve growth? And what are those things that you need to do? There's no gain without pain. So if you think that it's easy...
Speaking about revenue and capacity of states, which is what I alluded to earlier, what kind of consideration was given to the impression that some governors had at the time that we needed to do something about the revenue sharing formula to achieve this?
Well, you share what is available, right? If the emphasis is on sharing a cake that has not been baked, then you're sharing nothing. You share misery, right? So the thing to do is to focus on how to bake that cake, make it bigger. And then once it's baked, the question of everybody is going to be satisfied. You know that if you go into a zoo, when a lion is full, the lion cannot kill you. Well, if a lion is hungry and you go in there, you know what happens. So it's a question of what comes first, baking or sharing. So the states, there are certain adjustments that take care of the states' needs. The states get a certain amount of the VAT, get a certain amount of the withholding tax, get, VAT, and they get what we call the internalization of the foreign currency earnings. In other words, the federal government pays the states, the federation account is converted at a particular rate of exchange, and that becomes the revenue that is shared. There are certain things that have been done to ensure that there's optimality in that process so that the states are going to get more money. I'm convinced that with the recommendations and the adjustments, the states are going to be in position to meet their obligations. Now, long term, the internal generated revenues and the rates, right, growth within those states.
Without overburdening the people.
No, without overburdening the people. No, the states have to pay. You see, there's an management efficiency issue. Nigeria has more of a management problem than a revenue problem. And if you cannot manage 1 billion, you cannot manage 100.
Pardon me, but did you find that in those adjustments that we need to make, do we need to make a lot more in management of the already existing sources, or we have to do much more by looking for more sources of revenue?
No, some are what you call low-hanging fruits. First and foremost, you need to manage that which you have more efficiently. There's a lot of waste, there are leakages, right? And there's a lot of dumb things that are being done. Now, you stop doing the dumb things, you block the leakages, you optimize the resources that you have, and you know, the states that are complaining, let's face it, the states in 2011, the dollars the states were getting was being multiplied by 155. Today, it's being multiplied by over 100% more than that. It's, you know, so how can you complain, right? But you see, there's a lot of inefficiency in fiscal activity in Nigeria, more so at the state level. 42.5% of all the activities are states. So this is a fiscally dominant economy. And if the states do not manage their resources efficiently, you're going to have what you're seeing today.
But can the states manage their resources? Because as far as we know, they don't have full autonomy over mineral resources, for instance. In Zamfara State is chaos, mining gold there, and then the government putting a stop to that. You would have imagined that if the state government had got the capacity to legalize the process and be in charge, they'll have better outcomes.
I'm not so sure that is the case. The Zamfara State itself has had all sorts of difficulties. It's not a silver bullet. The truth is that Zamfara State IGR, its wage bill today, I think, is about 230% of its IGR. So, ab initio, the state is insolvent, as it were. But now it needs investments, it needs revenues and all that. And the economic insecurity there has led to this conflict because people become, the animalistic instincts begin to kick in. And so unfortunately, that's the situation they are facing themselves. And we need, what we are seeing are the symptoms of this type of economic insecurity leading to financial insecurity. So there's a need for a Marshall Plan, not only in the northeast, but also in the northwest. And so that's why the federal government has taken a position to assist in this. But the need for management, efficient management of the resources they have so far is an issue. If you don't manage even the little you have, then even when you bring scale, what you are going to have is an increase in level of inefficiency, an increase in waste. So the fact that we're having this conversation means that all the state governments are looking at how best to manage their resources efficiently. And if you look at the state government profiles, you find that even the states that have the higher mineral resources are the ones that suffer most in terms of outcomes, in terms of unemployment, inflation, misery index, and others. So there's no one-on-one correlation between having revenues and having positive economic outcomes.
All right, well, we're hoping to have a second part of this, maybe when the report is made. Is it been made public yet? It's up to the government to do that.
There will be a white paper.
Oh, okay. So maybe we'll keep focusing on this because, I mean, it's very important that, you know, the states are able to actualize this. Well, thank you for coming on. Mr. Bismarck Rewane is the chairman, Presidential Technical Advisory Committee. Yeah, it can be a technical word sometimes. On
PTAC.
Implementation of the National Minimum PTAC. That's just it. And CEO of Financial Derivatives. Thank you for coming on and all the best.
Thank you.
All right, well, back in a moment. Don't go away.